Blood vessels are a very important organ. They circulate blood from the heart to every part of the body, supplying all your organs and tissues with the oxygen and nutrients they need to keep them alive. At the same time, they carry the blood that removes carbon dioxide and other waste products of metabolism back to the heart to be replenished. The heart acts as a pump to push blood through the blood vessels that comprise the mammalian circulation. Starting at the left ventricle, oxygenated blood travels out to most of the organs and tissues of the body. Vessels travel to the brain, where they form the cerebral circulation, and to most of the rest of the body, where they form the systemic circulation. The vessels branch in the tissues and become narrower, eventually becoming capillaries. As blood passes through the capillaries, it delivers oxygen and nutrients, as well as removing carbon dioxide and metabolites. So, as blood emerges from the tissues, it is deoxygenated. Blood leaving tissues enters the venous circulation, which returns it to the heart, entering at the right atrium. From there, the deoxygenated blood is pumped into the right ventricle, which propels it forward to the lungs via the pulmonary circulation. The capillaries in the lung interface with air at the alveoli, where gas exchange takes place, resulting in reoxygenation of the blood. The oxygenated blood leaving the lung capillaries returns to the heart at the left atrium, where it is pumped to the left ventricle, ready to be circulated around the body again. You can see from this diagram that arteries are vessels that carry blood away from the heart, whereas veins carry blood to the heart. So in the systemic circulation, arteries carry oxygenated blood, while in the pulmonary circulation, arteries carry deoxygenated blood. Blood flows from the heart through large arteries, then smaller arterioles to the capillaries. It leaves the capillaries in small venules, then increasingly larger veins. Arteries and veins share a similar structure, but with some differences. The walls of the vessels are made up of 3 cell layers. All blood vessels are lined by a monolayer of endothelial cells, known as the tunica intima. The endothelial layer is surrounded by smooth muscle cells, which wrap circumferentially around the vessel. This layer is known as the tunica media. In large arteries, the endothelial and smooth muscle cells are separated by a layer of elastic fibres, known as the internal elastic lamina. An external elastic lamina may separate the smooth muscle cells from the outermost layer of the vessel, known as the tunica externa, tunica adventitia, or simply the adventitia. In comparison to arteries, veins have thinner walls and a larger internal diameter. This reflects the different functions that they serve. The thick elastic walls of arteries helps them to withstand the high blood pressures of the arterial system and to expand as blood pumps through them while recoiling during diastole. Veins are low pressure vessels and their lower elasticity helps to keep blood flowing in one direction. To help keep blood flowing towards the heart, often against gravity, large veins below the heart are also equipped with one-way valves. The muscle layer of arteries becomes thinner as they reduce in diameter and become arterioles. Capillary vessels have no muscle or adventitia, but are formed by a single layer of endothelial cells. In most tissues, arteries and veins run parallel and close to each other and can be easily distinguished by their relative diameters. This image shows a cross-section through the ventricle of a shark heart,
that has been stained to highlight particular features. The extensive bright pink staining shows the cardiac muscle cells. In this area of the heart, a coronary artery and coronary vein lie right next to each other, and you can see how they differ in their cellular structures. The dark purple stain shows the nuclei of cells. The endothelial cells are not specifically stained here, but you can see the location of their nuclei lining the inner surface of both the vein and the artery. The lighter purpley pink is the smooth muscle cells, and you can clearly see a very thick layer of muscle in the artery compared with hardly any in the vein. The pale pink stained tissue lying between the muscle layer and the heart muscle is the adventitial layer, containing mainly collagen, and it's apparent in both vessels. It's not possible to compare the elastic laminas here because the dyes used do not stain elastic tissue. There is a different stain for elastic tissue that could be used. One other feature that stands out in the image is that the artery holds its shape well and remains fairly circular in tissue sections. In contrast, veins tend to collapse because of their thin walls and have a less well-defined shape in tissue sections. The largest blood vessels in the body connect directly to the heart. The largest artery is the aorta, emerging from the left ventricle of the heart and carrying the cardiac output to all the organs of the body except the lungs. The vessels that carry the cardiac output to the lungs are the left and right pulmonary arteries, which emerge from the main pulmonary artery shortly after it exits the right ventricle. Blood returns from the lungs to the heart in the pulmonary veins, which empty into the left atrium. Blood from the upper part of the body, except the lungs, ends up in the superior vena cava, while the inferior vena cava receives blood from the lower body. Both these vessels empty into the right atrium. This diagram illustrates the route of the aorta through the body and the main arteries that branch off it to supply different organs. The aorta initially extends up towards the head, then bends backwards and down to form the aortic arch. Keeping in front of the spine, it travels down through the chest and abdomen, ending at the pelvis. From the aortic arch, branches form the subclavian arteries, which supply blood to the arms, and the carotid arteries, which supply blood to the brain, head and neck. In the thoracic region, arteries branch off to supply several organs in the thorax, including the bronchi, diaphragm and pericardium. The first branch below the heart gives rise to the celiac artery or celiac trunk, which then branches into the hepatic artery supplying the liver, and the gastric and splenic arteries supplying the stomach, esophagus, pancreas and spleen. Below that, the renal arteries branch off to the kidneys. The superior and inferior mesenteric arteries together deliver blood to the intestines and pancreas. Between them is the origin of the gonadal arteries, which supply the gonads. The last branches, at the pelvis, become the common iliac arteries, which supply blood to the legs and pelvic region of the body. Many of the arteries carrying blood to the tissues are mirrored by veins that return blood to the vena cava along the same route, but not always. At the top of the superior vena cava, branches develop into the subclavian veins, which drain blood from the arms, and the jugular veins, which drain the brain, head and neck regions. The superior vena cava also gives rise to the azygos vein, which drains blood from several structures in the thorax. Below the heart, the inferior vena cava first gives rise to the hepatic veins, which drain the liver, then the renal veins, which drain the kidneys, and the gonadal veins, which drain the gonads. The lumbar veins emerge below that and drain the abdominal wall, while the iliac veins branching at the bottom of the inferior vena cava drain blood from the legs and pelvis. Notice that none of the veins shown here equate to the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries that carry blood from the aorta to the gastrointestinal tract. There are equivalent superior and inferior mesenteric veins, but they drain blood to the liver via the hepatic portal vein, so that it can be processed and detoxified before entering the main bloodstream. I've already mentioned the obvious transport function of blood vessels. As blood circulates around the body, blood vessels deliver important blood gases and nutrients to tissues while removing waste products, and it transports hormones from where they are synthesized to their sites of action. But blood vessels have many additional functions. They are dynamically regulated, being able to constrict or dilate in response to a wide range of stimuli, such as temperature, pressure, oxygen levels, or hormones. When the muscle cells around the wall of a vessel contract, the vessel constricts, reducing flow through it. Relaxation of the muscle cells has the opposite effect, dilating the vessel and increasing flow through it. The arterial side of the circulation is responsible for blood pressure, which is caused by the force of the heart pumping blood through the vessels. The resistance to the flow of blood increases when the arteries constrict, causing blood pressure to rise. Dilation of the arteries reduces the resistance to blood flow, causing pressure to drop. For that reason, most of the drug treatments for high blood pressure cause the muscle cells in the artery wall to relax and the vessels to dilate. Blood vessels also play an important role in maintaining fluid balance in the body. In this case, the capillaries play the key role because of their very thin walls. Capillaries are the only site where fluid and solutes can exchange between the blood and surrounding tissues. The blood vessels in the skin are central to the maintenance of body temperature. When you get too hot, blood vessels in the skin dilate to increase the volume of blood at the body surface. That helps you to lose heat. The opposite occurs when you are too cold. Vessels in the skin constrict to keep blood in the core of the body and prevent heat loss from the skin. That is why your skin reddens in the heat and goes paler in the cold. Blood vessels are also important for the immune response, as they transport immune cells to infection and injury sites and help with the removal of pathogens and cellular debris. I hope you learned something from this video and enjoyed it enough to keep watching to this point. I have just given you a very brief overview of blood vessel functions. There is a lot more for you to discover, and some of it is in other videos on this channel. These two look at the mechanisms of excitation-contraction coupling in the smooth muscle of blood vessels and compare it with the other muscle types. One video covers regulation by the endothelium and another explains regulation by the nervous system and hormones. There is also a video that looks in more detail at the blood vessels in the skin, as well as other circulations like those in the brain and the lungs. I will be gradually adding new videos on additional aspects of blood vessels and the circulation, as well as updating older videos. Thank you very much for watching.